January 31st, 2000. Off the Southern California coast, the winter sun was slipping toward the horizon, casting a burnished glow across the Pacific. At 31,000 feet, Alaska Airlines Flight 261, a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, cruised northbound, its silver fuselage reflecting the fading light. For the 83 passengers and 5 crew members, the evening seemed routine, the end of a holiday or the start of a business trip. Few could have imagined that within an hour, this ordinary flight would become the focus of one of the most difficult investigations in U.S. aviation history. Alaska Airlines Flight 261 began its journey that afternoon in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, bound for Seattle with a planned stop in San Francisco. The aircraft, tail number N963AS, had served reliably for 7 years. Its pilots were among the carrier's most experienced: Captain Ted Thompson, a veteran with over 17,000 flight hours, and First Officer Bill Tansky, respected for his steady manner and technical knowledge. In the cabin, 3 attendants prepared for another smooth run up the West Coast. The route was familiar. From Mexico, the jet would track the shoreline of Baja California, cross into U.S. airspace near Los Angeles, then continue up the coast toward the Bay Area. Weather along the corridor was benign: high clouds, a light breeze, and visibility stretching for miles. Dispatchers expected an easy flight. Alaska Airlines in 2000 was a success story. Headquartered in Seattle, it had grown from a regional bush operator into a major West Coast carrier known for friendly service and a versatile fleet of Boeing 737s and MD-80 series jets. Its maintenance teams were regarded as competent and efficient, keeping schedules tight in a competitive market. The MD-80, a stretched derivative of the DC-9, was a workhorse of short and medium-haul routes. Flight 261's MD-83 variant seated 130 passengers and was powered by 2 JT-8D-219 engines mounted at the rear, leaving the wings clean and giving the airplane a sleek, purposeful look. One key component sat deep inside the tail: the horizontal stabilizer trim system. By adjusting a screw jack mechanism, nicknamed the jack screw, it allowed pilots or the autopilot to fine-tune the nose angle for level flight. With proper lubrication and inspection, it was considered highly reliable. Passengers boarding in Puerto Vallarta found a relaxed atmosphere. Families returning from winter vacations chatted as they stowed bags. Business travelers opened laptops or reviewed notes for Monday meetings. The cabin crew moved easily through the aisle, greeting regular flyers by name. As the jet taxied out, a mild onshore breeze rippled the palm trees along the runway. Moments later, the MD-80. As dusk settled over the California coast, Flight 261 leveled at 31,000 feet. The crew monitored instruments and chatted lightly with air traffic control. It was the kind of evening pilots savor: smooth air, a clear horizon, and only routine tasks ahead. In the cabin, passengers reclined into their seats. A few read novels or flipped through magazines. Others closed their eyes to nap before the quick stop in San Francisco. From the windows, the Pacific stretched like a sheet of polished glass. At 4:09 p.m. Pacific time, Captain Ted Thompson moved the control column gently forward and back, testing the trim. Something felt stiff. He mentioned it to First Officer Bill Tansky. The trim wheel, a hand crank mounted on the center pedestal, seemed reluctant to move, as if the stabilizer at the tail was resisting. Tansky tried it himself. He agreed the nose-down trim was unusually heavy. Their first thought was that the system might need to be unloaded. Sometimes, if the airplane carried a small amount of aerodynamic force, the trim motor worked harder. They adjusted pitch, then tried again. Still stiff. They switched off the autopilot and flew manually, hoping to sense the airplane's balance more directly. The MD-80's design relied on that jack screw mechanism to move the entire horizontal stabilizer up or down. If the jack screw threads wore or seized, the stabilizer could jam, a rare but serious event. Alaska's manuals covered trim malfunctions, but few pilots ever encountered one in service. Thompson and Tansky remained calm, consulting the quick reference handbook while keeping the aircraft steady. "Let's talk to maintenance," Thompson said. Tansky contacted Alaska Airlines Maintenance Control in Seattle on the company radio. The specialist on duty listened as they described the stubborn trim. He advised trying the electric trim switches again, and if necessary, applying the alternate trim system. Both pilots tried, but the nose-down command continued to meet resistance. Passengers noticed little beyond a change in engine tone as the autopilot disengaged. The airplane still felt level. Cabin crew continued serving drinks, unaware of the conversation in the cockpit. Thompson and Tansky reviewed the idea of diverting to Los Angeles, the nearest large airport. But with the aircraft controllable and San Francisco only 45 minutes ahead, they decided to stay on course for now while they assessed. At 4:19 p.m., they succeeded in moving the trim slightly using the manual wheel, easing pressure on the controls. The MD-83 returned to stable cruise. The pilots discussed landing options. San Francisco was still good, but if the trim worsened, they could request an immediate descent to LAX. As twilight deepened, Flight 261 continued south of the Channel Islands, the lights of Los Angeles beginning to glow faintly on the horizon. Inside the cockpit, the calm of cruise had been replaced by careful concentration. The pitch trim problem was no longer an intermittent nuisance. It was now an obstacle to stable flight. Captain Ted Thompson kept steady pressure on the yoke, while First Officer Bill Tansky scanned instruments and communicated with controllers. At 4:39 p.m., the pilots asked Los Angeles Center for a block altitude, permission to roam between 20,000 and 25,000 feet as needed, so they could work the controls without pressure to hold a specific height. The controller approved, understanding that the aircraft was troubleshooting. Thompson briefed the cabin crew. "We're having a little issue with the trim, nothing alarming, but please stay seated and secure the cabin." Flight attendants nodded, their professionalism concealing any concern. With the autopilot off, the MD-83 felt heavier than normal, as though its nose wanted to rise against their hands. The pilots tried trimming nose down again, but the jack screw resisted. A metallic grinding sound faintly reached their ears, a sign of threads under stress. They decided to test a procedure known as alternate trim, using a different electric motor to move the stabilizer. For a moment, the wheel budged, then stopped. "That's it," Thompson muttered quietly. "We're flying it as is." At 4:48 p.m., they requested a diversion to Los Angeles International Airport. The controller cleared them, giving vectors toward the coast. Thompson eased the airplane into a slow descent, keeping speed moderate. Passengers might have sensed only a gentle nose-down attitude as the Pacific darkened below. A few asked attendants if there was a problem. The attendants reassured them, explaining they were heading for a precautionary landing. As they descended through 18,000 feet, Thompson remarked that the controls felt momentarily lighter, as if something inside the tail had shifted. Both men exchanged cautious relief. Perhaps the binding threads had freed themselves. They allowed the jet to settle at 17,500 feet while considering whether to keep descending or level off to verify stability. At 4:51 p.m., without warning, the stabilizer broke free of its remaining threads. The horizontal tail pivoted to an extreme position, forcing the nose sharply downward. The MD-83 pitched into a steep dive. G-forces pushed the pilots against their restraints. Thompson shouted, "Pull!" as he and Tansky hauled back on the yokes with all their strength. The airplane's speed rapidly built past 330 knots. Loose objects in the cockpit tumbled as alarms blared. Passengers felt a terrifying drop. Drinks spilled, luggage shifted, and startled cries rose from the cabin. Some instinctively grabbed armrests, others clasped hands in prayer. Through the forward windows, the ocean spun wildly, reflecting the last sliver of sunlight. At 5:01 p.m., the final seconds of Alaska Airlines Flight 261 unfolded over the cold Pacific waters near Point Mugu. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky held the controls with every ounce of strength. They had fought their aircraft back from one dive already, and they were trying again. But the damaged stabilizer had lost all structural integrity. The nose pitched down steeply, rolling left as the airplane accelerated toward the sea. Their calm voices on the cockpit recorder spoke to their professionalism even in extremis. Concise commands, quiet determination, and no hint of panic. In the cabin,
Flight attendants shouted brace instructions above the roar of wind and engines. Passengers leaned forward, hands over heads or clutching loved ones. Some prayed aloud, others sat frozen in disbelief. Through the windows, a blur of ocean rushed up to meet them. The MD-83 struck the water nose first at nearly 300 knots, shattering on impact. A spray of foam and debris marked the spot where, moments earlier, 88 souls had been alive. On shore, at Naval Air Station Point Mugu, radar operators saw the blip disappear. Coast Guard and Navy personnel scrambled boats and helicopters. A pair of fishermen, startled by a flash and thunderous splash, radioed the Coast Guard within minutes, giving an exact position. Rescue crews raced to the scene, scanning for survivors. But the crash had been unsurvivable. The airplane had disintegrated on contact. As darkness settled, searchlights swept across the gentle swells. Debris, seat cushions, papers, a child's shoe, floated on the surface, illuminated by the beams. Coast Guard cutters established a perimeter while divers prepared to enter the frigid water. The immediate priority was to confirm there were no survivors and to secure wreckage before it drifted. Recovery would be painstaking, a mix of small fragments and heavier components lying 650 feet below the surface. News of the accident reached Los Angeles International Airport quickly. At the Alaska Airlines gate where Flight 261 was expected, waiting family members were ushered to a private room. Airline representatives, chaplains, and counselors gathered, preparing to deliver the worst possible news. Television stations broke into programming with early reports of a plane down off the California coast, followed by shaky footage of flashing lights on dark water. Through the night, Navy divers and Coast Guard crews worked in cold, rolling seas. They retrieved personal effects, life vests, and small sections of fuselage. By morning, a command post had been established at Point Mugu. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, dispatched a GO team from Washington, D.C., led by investigator John Goglia. Their task, to find out why a modern airliner flown by seasoned pilots in good weather had fallen from the sky. Salvage ships with cranes and sonar arrived within 48 hours. Using remotely operated vehicles, crews mapped the wreckage field, locating engines, landing gear, and large chunks of fuselage on the ocean floor. Recovery divers worked in carefully plotted grids, raising pieces in nets to avoid further damage. Special attention was given to locating the flight recorders, the black boxes, which were emitting acoustic pings. By February 2nd, both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder had been recovered, still intact despite the impact forces. Meanwhile, memorials formed along the Southern California.
When daylight returned to the Point Mugu coast, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, gathered at a Navy hangar to begin the painstaking work of understanding why Flight 261 had fallen from the sky. Their mission was not only to explain the tragedy, but to make sure such a loss would never happen again. The first priority was the tail section hauled from the ocean on February 3rd. Even through the bent metal, one component stood out, the jack screw assembly. This long threaded rod, paired with a bronze Acme nut, controlled the angle of the horizontal stabilizer. The stabilizer itself looked as if it had broken free under immense loads, but the threads on the jack screw told the real story. Under magnification, investigators saw they were almost completely worn away, leaving only a thin remnant of metal holding the stabilizer in place at the moment of failure. Attention turned to how an aircraft part so crucial could deteriorate to that extent. Maintenance records showed the airplane had complied with all scheduled lubrication and inspection tasks, at least on paper. But deeper review revealed a subtle problem. Over several years, the recommended lubrication interval for the jack screw had been extended, sometimes doubled, in an effort to streamline maintenance schedules. Mechanics relied on measuring end play, the amount of free movement in the screw, to judge wear. That method was difficult to apply accurately, and a single small error could allow a dangerously worn component to remain in service. Metallurgical analysis confirmed the threads had been wearing down for months, possibly years. Each trim input by the pilots on January 31st had shaved away the last fragments of support. The investigators also examined the cockpit voice recorder, which captured the crew's steady voices as they tried every possible procedure. Their professionalis.
time impressed even veteran accident specialists. One NTSB member later remarked, "They gave us everything they had. There's no question their actions delayed the inevitable long enough for us to understand what failed." By late spring 2000, a clear picture had emerged. The crash was the result of a mechanical failure of the horizontal stabilizer trim system, caused by excessive wear on the jack screw due to insufficient lubrication and inspection intervals. Human error in maintenance oversight, rather than any fault by the pilots or flight attendants, was the root. The MD-80 design relied on that single screw to hold the tailplane in position. If it failed completely, recovery was virtually impossible. The NTSB's final report, released in December 2000, issued a series of recommendations. Airlines were ordered to shorten lubrication intervals for the jack screw and adopt more precise tools for measuring wear. Mechanics received new training, and manufacturers improved service manuals with clearer warnings about end play limits.